ReleaseWire helps businesses connect with interested journalists and bloggers. Check out the link in the description to save 25% on your first press release.
Admiral, radar shows that we have liberals approaching at 3 o'clock, and libertarians at 9 o'clock, and conservatives at 6 o'clock. They're coming from every angle, every viewpoint. Oh, it's Political Radar with your hosts, Rhonda and Elliot.
Hey, all you political junkies, welcome to Political Radar, the best 30 minutes of unscripted, uncensored political talk you will hear all day. Episode 31, and I'm just going to go ahead and apologize because my voice is a little scratchy.
Nobody cares about the voice. You should just apologize.
Okay, I'm just going to apologize.
Every episode.
Yes.
I think we should start out with an apology.
Sounds
so
good.
Sorry about the voice. I'm really, just going to get through this as the best that I can today. I have a little cold. So we have with us for episode 31, Chuck Rybak, who is a WGB professor of English and creative writing.
It's all true. Yep.
Every day.
Yep.
Thanks for coming on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So why the heck do we have this guy on a political podcast?
Good.
Well, let's see. Education, politics. Yeah, they seem to be kind of, there's a little bit going on with that right now.
Just a little bit for a while.
Leading the witness, counselor.
Okay. Yes. Sorry. Okay. So let's get to it. So
Sure.
The UW system right now. Woo! What's going on? I know you've been writing a blog for a while.
Yep.
It's fascinating. And I'd love you to talk about it.
Sure. Well, what's going on right now is complete and total destruction. No, not really. It's hard to talk about. I've been blogging. All the posts have a title. They start with UW struggle. It's very dramatic. And it's just my personal blog. And so I should probably say that I don't speak for anybody but myself as an employee and a faculty member. And faculty have been under fire for a long time and are often at the center of the conflicts that you're asking about and are scapegoated. And I just got sick of it and wanted to at least add some perspective. And that's kind of where it started. But I started writing about this way back. People will forget the proposal originally to make the UW a public authority that ended up not happening. And there was a lot of conflict about that.
What would that mean, to make it a public authority?
To basically create a consistent flow of funding that was based off of tax, sales tax. And so it would just move it kind of off of the current model of pulling this, what they call GPR funding and just, budgeting for that all the time and just having this consistent revenue stream. And there was a lot of pushback about that. A really long story involved with that.
Can I just stop you for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Who led the charge for that?
That was originally proposed by President Cross and Governor Walker, that they were united in wanting that to happen. And so it's kind of an interesting look into the conflicts with the UW, and that a lot of people think that, okay, what's happening right now with the system and the budget cuts and all of the squabbling that is going on, that's just the governor, or what is the governor doing? But I think really even going as far back as something like the public authority proposal, that what you see is there are a lot of competing constituencies in terms of what they want for a vision for the UW. And those, that competition even exists within the Republican Party, And so that proposal was ultimately upended by Republican legislators who went against the governor and President Cross in that proposal. And I think it was largely because they didn't want to lose the ability to micromanage the system.
And who is President Cross? So if people are listening and they don't know, who is that?
President Cross used to be the chancellor of the UW Colleges and Extension. And I worked in the Colleges and Extension for 7 years. And he was coming in as I left and then went to Green Bay. And so when President Riley, the previous president, resigned, Cross applied for and got that job. But who is he? Basically, he is in charge of the system, the comprehensive campuses, the 2-year system, extension. He's the big cheese.
He's the big cheese.
He's
So
the big
what was
boss.
the big cheese's argument for this public authority?
He wanted a consistent revenue stream. That I think what he was really trying to do was move the system outside of a place where every biennium there was a major budget squabble and going back and forth over the smallest things that you could imagine. To basically just give the system, at least this was his argument, to give the system some consistency, and that once you had a dependable, consistent revenue stream, that you could then make responsible decisions based on what you had financially going forward.
So what you're saying is the Republican legislators they weren't supporting those ideas.
No. And I think part of it I'll speak plainly about this, and is that I think there is some pleasure among some legislators in micromanaging the system.
You think so?
Extensively.
Okay, so this
Yes.
proposal would have set a top line amount and it'd be fixed, or it would alter per budget.
I can't say for sure.
Okay.
I think the hope was that it would be fixed in the same way that people hope that with transportation money.
Okay.
And we're seeing that that's fluctuating. And I think some of the pushback regarding that was that, that was when it was a $300 million cut that was on the table, and that by moving to a public authority model that we might actually be embracing even more of a cut. That sure, there might be a consistent stream of revenue, but what if it's not enough? What if it is really low and not what we need? So then we're locked into this model. And plus, there wasn't any study done ahead of time. Noel Radomski, I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right. I know all these people through social media and never hear their names spoken aloud. Wrote a really great piece comparing what the UW was proposing with the state of Virginia, which had moved to a public authority model, and the amount of time and effort that they put into that, like a commission. I mean, they studied the proposal for 5 to 7 years ahead of time before moving in. And we first heard of the public authority model when the budget was released. So there was no study, there was no planning. It was just, we want a consistent revenue stream.
So what were the Republicans who did not support this? What were some of their arguments?
Some of the normal things that you hear, that if regarding tuition, that basically if the UW, and I'm really relying on memory because so much has happened in a year and a half, and this was really the start of things, so this is way back in the beginning, that really it would move the system much more from the oversight of the legislator to the oversight of the regents. And a lot of legislators didn't want to give up that oversight. And I think there's a host of reasons for that. But really wanting to, I don't know, my personal belief is that they wanted to micromanage the system and didn't want to give up the ability to do that. The most vocal voices.
In this authority, though, there wouldn't be any elected official. So where's the accountability then to taxpayers?
That is above my pay grade. It probably comes through, in that case, the regents, and that all the regents are appointed by the governor. And so I think in that capacity, you could say that's where the accountability is. But beyond that, I can't really say.
Okay.
And we know how well accountability and the governor's plans work well
Right.
together.
Well, that's the theory, right? I mean, that's why we have a legislature to begin with, and that's why they're supposed to deliberate over things.
Yep.
Spend 3 hours talking about driveways, things like that. So, I mean, the idea is to have that accountability, whether in reality that happens or not. I think that's the argument. Right?
But I think the reality of it too is that without the planning ahead of time, is that nobody really knows whether or not that was a good idea. That the idea was proposed quickly and then it was gone almost just as quickly, and there's really no sense of, was that a good idea? And we just moved on to the next argument.
So where are we now?
Wow, we're in a lot of places. You want the quick summary of the blogging arc? It would be faculty, tenured faculty. So tenure is always, here are the two general rules for my blog, and I post them with every post, is that 1, faculty are always to blame, and 2, you won't believe what's happened since the last thing that's happened. And that is pretty much held true most of the way through. And so if you can remember the major arguments with the legislature back when Riley was still president was there was the big conflict over cash reserves, right? And so we all remember this, that the system was supposedly hoarding money in offshore accounts or like these secret accounts that added up to millions and millions of dollars, and were keeping
the UW system was hoarding money.
The UW system and what they called cash reserves. And so there was an accounting done of how much money this was, and a lot of legislators were offended that all of this money was in reserve, countering, then why are you always crying that you're poor and asking for more money when you have all of this cash on hand? And the response was, well, you want us to be more like a business. Responsible businesses operate with cash reserves, right? So regardless of anybody's opinion on that, the people that they were blaming for that were the administration, UW Central. So that's Ray Cross. At that time, it would have been Riley, but it's Cross now. And the people in Central, and then the administration across the system, right? And normally when there's a problem and you're blaming someone for something, you then hold them accountable, right? As we were talking. But that's exactly the opposite of what happened. And as usual, the attention pivoted to faculty and tenure and whether or not faculty should have tenure. And it ultimately resulted in the weakening of tenure. And I think some could argue the removal of it. And that's a position that I think is worth supporting.
So can you actually explain? There are people that are listening that they're not aware of what tenure is.
Yep. What is tenure?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Tenure is basically it is, it's called the tenure track, right? And you come in as what is known as a probationary faculty member. I've earned tenure in the UW system twice. And I earned tenure when I was in the colleges, and then I gave up tenure as a risky proposition to take a job that I felt I was better suited for. It was what I was more trained for. But the short version being, you go through a 6-year rigorous process where you have review every single year. When I was in the colleges, I had a retention review for the first 6 years of my career where I could have been fired every single year.
Who's reviewing you when you're going through that?
Your peers. It's really a peer-driven process. And and it does move up a chain. And so once it gets past like your department, it could be then a unit or a dean and so forth. But it's really a process that ensures high quality work. And I can tell you that it is going through the ringer like I've never been. It is hard. I was working 80+ hour weeks every week, canceling family vacations. I would have to put together my dossiers over, basically, so for listeners who aren't familiar, I have to prove my case every year. And so in addition to all of the regular work I do with teaching, service, community work, then I have to document my greatness, right? I have to sit down with a folder and prove to everybody everything that I've done. And then that document itself is 250 pages, 300 pages every single year, right? Until finally you get to your 6th year. Some people do go up early, maybe in a 5th year, but by your 6th year, you go up for what's called tenure. And the short version being is that what you've demonstrated for over half of a decade is that your job performance is worthy of you then being judged by your job performance, which is, it gives you, a lot of people think of it as protection from ever being fired, which is false. People with tenure do get fired. But the guarantee is that after you've proven yourself through a performance analysis, is that then you can only be fired based on your performance, that you've earned the right to be fired for performance-based reasons rather than political reasons, or I just don't like your department, I'm going to eliminate it and fire you. And there were exceptions to that, like financial emergencies that universities could declare. But those emergencies usually had teeth in other ways that it'd be like declaring bankruptcy. So it wasn't just related to faculty, that there were other institutional repercussions that would go along with that. So basically, once you earn tenure, it's a level of you've proven yourself that you belong in this institution, that you're a good teacher, that you're a good researcher, that you work with the community right? There are a whole host of job responsibilities.
So it sounds like you'd want to, we would want to encourage that.
Absolutely.
So what's going on with that
Absolutely.
right now?
And when you compare the salaries for Wisconsin professors, and so here's, again, for listeners not familiar with the system, one of the big problems in talking about the UW is how big it is. And so when people hear UW, they often think Madison, that those two things are synonymous, and they're not. And the differences between individual campuses and Madison, for example, and any individual campus in another, a whole different world. And so I think it's easy to align the public against professors and think of people like me as being spoiled or protected or having things that normal people don't have.
I've read privileged.
Yeah, and it's so inaccurate. So in terms of your question, that nationally, and I think Madison's probably the exception here. I'd have to look, but my salary is way below the average for what I could make in a job, the same job in a different state. And I have a PhD. It's not, I don't say that to brag. It's just what I was interested in and what I pursued. And I'm just now, for the first time in my life, hitting $50,000, right? And for working 80 plus hours a week, right? Or more. Wow. And I'm happy with what I do. I like my job. But I also don't have a tenured faculty yacht that I fly my helicopter to when I'm not working, right? And so in terms of the tenure argument, that one of the things you'll consistently see with conflict in the UW is that faculty are moved to the center of argument and discussion. Are they teaching enough? Are they too spoiled and privileged, or so forth? But the reality is that that's always a distraction, that faculty are one of the most powerless constituencies in the UW. I wish that I had all of the power that was attributed to me, believe me, that I could set my own salary, give myself raises, make budgets for the system. I don't do any of that. All of that is done by other people. But faculty really draw ire for, I think it's part of a larger divide and conquer strategy. People like to have an enemy to look at, and we just have to find a way to get around that.
So what? So what is that then? Obviously it's real. It's happening in the state, and the governor is definitely driving that bus. So what is it that's happening to combat that? Like, what's the plan to make people recognize that this is the way it is right now, and what do you need to do to, I guess, give yourself security? Well,
there are a couple. Every answer is going to be complicated, and so what is the plan, right? And again, on the outside looking in, I think if you're not familiar with this is going to be the beginning of my 15th year in the system, and I'm just now learning and understanding how this behemoth of a thing works and fits together. And so if you're not really familiar with it, it's hard to understand. And I don't mean that in any condescending way. I mean, literally, it's complicated. And so what's the plan? And I think people mistakenly think that the system is unified in the vision of what should happen. And so a lot of what's happened over the past year is really internal conflict in the system. And frankly, a lot of people have been disappointed in President Cross and don't feel that he's been an advocate for faculty specifically, and really left us out there on our own for criticism without answering back. And there are a lot of rhetorical reasons for doing that, not wanting to anger the legislature, fearful of anything that you say could lead to another budget cut, right? And that really should speak to the larger reality of the eggshells that we walk on. In that,
so who's your leader, though? I mean, if you don't have your leader leading you, who's doing that job?
Well, faculty. My opinion on this is that faculty have been on their own for a while now, and so we've done all of that ourselves. And what you've seen recently is, and this was in the news quite a bit, was that faculty senates across the system, not all of them, passed no confidence motions in Raycross and the Board of Regents. And there was a lot of blowback about that. And that's to be expected, right? And remember, resolutions passed by faculty senates are completely non-binding, right? They don't change policy at all.
You're just sending a message.
Right. And you do so because, and you do that especially when every other outlet you've had for your voice has been shut down. And so leading up to those no confidence votes, you try to speak, right? You write editorials, you contact legislators, and you're told over and over again, no, we're not listening. And then the no confidence motions start to pass. And then there's a lot of anger and like suddenly people are listening. But if you've been following the news in the past couple months, that those motions have really had an effect. And that I think President Cross, for the first time, is saying to legislators, you really need to support the UW. And he's making an economic argument, and the needs of business and so forth. And
because he knows who he's talking to.
Yep, it's a very crafted message. And but you're also seeing, you're also seeing legislators, but also regents, Regent Farrow, who when faculty had their tenured protections basically stripped away from them, said famously in the meeting, "Welcome to the 21st century." Even she was crying out for support, and I think the no confidence motions have a lot to do with that. Not everything, but there is definitely a momentum now that I have not seen in years and years to get behind the system and fund it. And so the hashtag that is popular now is Fund Freeze, coined by Nick Fleischer down at UW Milwaukee, who I had the pleasure of finally meeting recently. And that is an argument that, with the tuition freeze in place, that unless you fund the freeze, increase funding to offset the dwindling, or offsetting the inability to raise tuition. And I think not raising tuition is good, just for the record. Like, I don't want students to pay more, but if you're going to do that, you need to raise the state's contribution to the system to help offset that. So that's a lot of what's going on right now. I don't think faculty are going to see what was the tenured protections that were on the state statutes come back. And I think there are going to be long-term repercussions for this, that we don't really have tenure as it was defined before. And so, for example, previously, you could only be fired for something really egregious you did in your job, like based on your job performance, or a state, or like a fiscal emergency for a campus or the system, right? But now that's changed, and the language for getting rid of tenured faculty by design opens it up to really anything: program change, modification. What does that even mean, right? And that's clearly designed to provide a wide doorway to walk through. And when you think about performance, there's a lot of talk about tying the system budget to performance metrics, and those metrics are going to be a way to steer money to certain programs, and then that could, of course, lead to program modification, which could then lead to faculty being laid off.
I think that it's a fair criticism because we have a huge lack in our state and in our country of STEM programs. We need engineering and math. We need people who can create things that we use, things that contribute greatly to the economy, instead of pulling people in from other countries, on H-1B visas. And, I'm somewhat familiar with UWGB.
Sure.
I'm going to be teaching there this fall. And
congratulations.
I don't have a PhD. Thank you.
All right.
And it's the reason they have to drag some dweeb like me in is because of some of the issues that you're talking about. But also there's I think that there could be a shift in focus to things that are more useful. And I know that that's a hard thing to hear for I believe in liberal arts, but there you hit a point where we have enough of certain things. And I know business degrees are very popular at UWGB, and they pump out business degrees, and how many of those does our state need,
right,
versus other disciplines? So, And I don't know who should make that decision and how exactly it should be made, but I see some issues for sure.
And I think the problem is that you cannot exactly make that decision. And so in the situation that you're describing, I think people long for the ability to have a one-to-one correspondence between jobs and employment, which just doesn't work, right? Of course, it's easy when you're talking about a field like nursing, right? You go to nursing school, you become a nurse. It's like, hey, look at that, a one-to-one correspondence. You need more nurses, then we're going to put more money into this program. But it's different when you're talking about other jobs and other industries. And so GB, for example, our focus is interdisciplinarity and, really bringing together the knowledge of different fields to work in cooperation. But no matter how much we want it to, we're never going to be able to say that by doing this thing, it's going to point you into this specific job. Because there was a different way to deal with that in the past. It was called job training. And corporations invested in job training, and they're not as interested in doing that anymore.
I always believe, though, that that's what they're supposed to be doing when they're given these tax breaks. That's what they say they're going to be doing.
I agree with you. I think it's when you're looking at who's the main constituent of the UW system, and I'm always hesitant to refer to students as customers, but I know that that's a popular metaphor, right? It's really the students. Their tuition dollars are the bulk of revenue, right? And in a system where there's a lot of tax breaks, like you say, it is a little, I think, dicey to bend the entirety of your mission to a constituency that's not really a constituency because you're not providing tax dollars. And that's not true across the board. I mean, I'm oversimplifying that. But to your point, I think it's really hard to pin down that sort of one-to-one correspondence. And I think you'll see, and I've been doing a lot of reading, some great articles about why humanities students do really well in programming fields, right? And then, so how do you harness that? Do you want to be a humanities programming major, or can you still be an English major with a minor in computer science? Or can you be an English major and work on a subfield called digital humanities? And you can, but those are not the things that legislators are recognizing or supporting.
Digital humanities is where you read your news on your iPad.
Are you explaining that to me?
Instead of a piece of paper.
Completely.
He gives me crap because I still bring newspapers. I love my newspaper.
I turn on my phone and I just say digital
So any
humanities.
last thoughts? We're basically out of time. Anything else?
Wow. I guess I would say if I could, send a message to anybody who's listening that looks at the system and feels that there's too much. We get too much money. Professors are spoiled. Nobody has enough skin in the game, all of that kind of stuff. Just please know that the people that I work with in the UW are middle-class people, and professors are taxpayers too. And so when people talk about employees in the UW, they sort of put them in a dichotomy as opposed to taxpayers. We pay taxes. I shop at Woodman's. I go to Home Depot. Like, I'm a normal person, I came to Wisconsin to work for the UW system. They offered me a job. And the political climate has really turned into a place that a lot of people like me are not feeling welcome anymore. I was married in this state. I bought my first house in this state. My daughters were born here. I'm from Buffalo, New York, but this is my home now, and I want to stay here. And in the current budget crisis, a lot of people similar to me, again, middle income at best, are leaving. My department head took a new job in North Carolina for greater pay. And I'm sad that he's gone, but that also means he picked up his family, his wife, and his 2 kids, and they no longer live in Astor Park. They're no longer part of our tax base. They're not part of our schools and community anymore. And a lot of people are leaving, and we need to pay attention to that. It's more than just about protecting a certain job description. It's really the UW is part of the community, in terms of the employees, being an employer, sending students out into the world, into the workforce, like you were describing. And we're hurting that right now. The system needs support, especially from the public. And, please think about doing that. I guess
So
that's what
retaining
I'd
the
say.
middle class, really, it's a theme across pretty much the country in
Yeah,
general.
and we really could pull the camera back a little bit and see how what's happening with the UW right now fits in with public schools in general, with the roads in the state right now. We do have budget problems, and that affects all of us, right? It's not just the UW that is at issue here, that there's a larger pattern.
Okay. On that note, I'm going to thank our sponsor, ReleaseWire. ReleaseWire is a powerful media engagement service connecting businesses to interested journalists and bloggers. ReleaseWire is an effective and affordable way to get the word out about your business. As a fan of Political Radar, we have a special offer for you. Distribute your first on-demand press release with ReleaseWire and save 25%. Visit releasewire.com/politicalradar or click on the link in the video description to learn more. ReleaseWire, from release to results. And with that, thank you, Chuck.
Oh, thanks for having me.
If people would like to read up more about your thoughts on the matter, direct them to your blog.
Yeah, it is the vain web address of chuckrybak.com.
Okay. That's chuckrybak.com.
And I've moved away from UW posts, so my last one is on Stranger Things.
I saw
Netflix.
that.
Yes.
I saw that. I mentioned that to my wife. I'm like, see, everybody watches it.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
It is awesome. Yeah. And I didn't read your post yet, but I saw the headline. And to get in touch with me, you can hit me up on Twitter at Elliot. And just a quick note: there was a city council meeting last night as we taped this, and we had a pretty fun back and forth last night on Twitter. So we should come up with a hashtag for that and get more people involved. So what about you, Rhonda?
I'm at Sit in a Cow on Twitter, and I'm on Facebook as well.
So with that, thank you, Chuck.
No, thank you.
Yeah,
That was
thanks.
fast.
That
Wow.
was great. You were great. Thank
And
you.
Thanks, listeners.
I appreciate it.
And viewers. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to Political Radar. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. To stay up to date, visit politicalradar.com or connect with us on Facebook or Twitter.